He's got his own podcast and YouTube show. The man has more than 7.2 million subscribers. He is one of the preeminent conservative voices in the world, not just this country. And he's somebody that called me a jackass. He wanted to see his boy, your boy, as in me. Well, here I am, the Stephen A. Smith Show with Mr. Ben Shapiro. Up next, holla.
Oh boy.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the special edition of the Stephen A. Smith Show, coming at you, as I love to do, usually 3 times a week at the very minimum, over the digital airways of YouTube and, of course, iHeartRadio. Want to thank all my followers and subscribers for continuing to show love for the show. Keep it coming, and I'm going to keep on coming. I wanted to transition on a show like today from the regular norm. There's not going to be a potpourri of topics. It's just a conversation with an individual by the name of Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is a guy that's been around for a while. He's established himself in the conservative community as one of the preeminent voices. He's beloved by a lot of conservatives, a lot of right-wingers. He's unapologetic about his positions on practically most, if not all, occasions. And he certainly was that way when it came to talking about Derek Chauvin, the officer most of us believe, and the court clearly believed, murdered George Floyd several years ago, sparking riots across the country at that particular moment in time.
Oh, no. If this is going to be a lot about Derek Chauvin, I hope Smith is like super familiar. The sub overlay is stuck. Wait, I hope he's super familiar with all the facts of that case. No, it's not. Fuck you.
Derek Chauvin, an officer, a police officer from Minneapolis, Minnesota, ended up being convicted and sentenced to more than 21 years in prison. And in my estimation, he absolutely positively deserved it. Derek Chauvin is an individual that I believe murdered George Floyd, that most black Americans feel murdered George Floyd, along with a bevy of other people, not just blacks, not just whites, but even people in the conservative communities. The Sean Hannitys of the world and others proclaim the same thing. Ben Shapiro himself felt that way initially. What he had tweeted out.
He's changed his mind on a lot of shit, though.
Upon further reflection, as the trial went on, as evidence came forward, he believed otherwise. And once Derek Chauvin was convicted and sent to prison, in the aftermath of that, Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, ultimately became the 47th president of the United States, winning this last election in November of 2024. And from that moment on, once he re-entered the White House on January 20th, 2025, Ben Shapiro has stated for the record that he believes Donald Trump should pardon Derek Chauvin. I took exception to that. I didn't know what he was thinking. I said to myself, why would you suggest such a thing? And I even went so far as to say, or to ask Ben Shapiro, a devout Jew who is incredibly supportive of Israel and the Jewish community and issues pertaining to the Jewish community, I asked a simple question: if George Floyd had been Jewish and there was a knee on his neck for over 9 minutes.
Have you already explained why you think conservatives are pushing for the pardon of Chauvin? I have no idea. Isn't it just the Daily Wire that started this, and now other people kind of jumped on board? I wonder if it's just to try to get like a total W on all the BLM stuff. Like if they can rewrite as much as history as officially as possible, it just makes them feel better about their overall narrative. So if they can get like Chauvin pardoned, then they can officially point back and look and say, oh, look, all of BLM was a lie. See, we proved it. This is one of the reasons also why I disagree with the attorney guy that came on to chat yesterday, who I think we like agree on most things. We just had a minor disagreement over this thing. But when he was talking about how like it's not really that important if a warrant gets issued for the Trump admin or not, because at the end of the day, you know, is anything going to happen? I think it is important to get these victories. And like you see the conservatives fighting for him, right? Like they think it's important to get this guy pardoned. Like at the end of the day, does it really mean anything? I mean, not really, but it does, because now they can carry forth that narrative that, look, not only is BLM built on a lie because the stats were bullshit in the beginning, and not only was BLM a lie because the organization itself was highly fraudulent, which it was, right? BLM was also a lie because the main thing that set it off, the George Floyd killing, that Chauvin didn't even really kill the dude. And thankfully Trump noticed that and he pardoned the guy, and, you know.
Would he feel the same way? So Ben Shapiro.
Somebody said, IRGC is a part of the state, but directly led and directed by Khamenei. I suck at pronouncing that guy's name. Was it the Quds Force, which was the part of the IRGC that does like this? What was the part that Soleimani ran? I don't know if it was the IRGC or just the Quds Force, but part of it is, I think, supposed to be very independent from Iran. Like they have their own revenue stream even, so that they can operate free of the state. Obviously, I mean, if the Ayatollah or whatever was to tell them like, hey, don't do this, or hey, whatever, it would be a problem. But I thought they enjoyed quite a bit of separate control or separate operation from the rest of Iran. But I don't remember if that was just the Quds Force, if that's what Soleimani was in charge of, or if it was all of the IRGC. I don't remember.
With his own platform, which is very formidable, I might add.
Holy shit, this is the longest fucking intro ever.
Accused me essentially of race baiting. Says it's something that I do all the time. Says he's got to turn down the volume every time I'm speaking. He said a lot of things about me. And to his credit, when I invited him on the show to have a man-to-man conversation, he did not hesitate.
Man-to-man.
He actually was supposed to do this days ago. I had to postpone. So, giving credit where credit is due, giving him an opportunity to express whatever it is that he wanted to express to me, about George Floyd, about the whole situation involving his murder at the hands of Derek Chauvin and beyond, I was more than happy to do so.
Wait, Hasan break. Hasan explains from his POV why him and Destiny grew apart.
He grew apart? Did you at one point realize that his worldview was messed up, or did he turn on you once you had more success? Like, what's the story here? I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but I realized that his community was not as progressive or as liberal or genuinely empathetic as I thought it was initially, and that he himself was not really interested in advancing a cause, but more so just simply in it for the blood sport. And yes, in the same time frame, I was also growing as a content creator and had actually eclipsed him, and he can't stand that. He literally...
Somebody can go and check, but I'm pretty sure he didn't, quote unquote, eclipse me until after I had split my community up from all the socialists, I thought. Am I wrong on the timeline there? Somebody can go back and check, but I thought after we had our Kamala debate, I thought I was still a bigger streamer, and then after that, I realized that a lot of my audience was getting really mad at me, and then I realized a lot of my audience was actually like fucking socialists. And then when I figured that out, I was like, hey, if you're a socialist memers, get the fuck out of here. I don't do that shit. And then I think like probably lost like a third of my audience. Some went to Vosh and some went to Hasan after. It was my recollection of things. I don't know. Somebody go back and check out the stats, but. Oh, fuck, this is wrong.
Literally needs his orbiters in his mind, okay? People that he has a very transactional approach to constantly be...
Nobody is more transactional, by the way, in their relationships than Hasan. And you can tell this with how much, for instance, Hasan manipulates the people around him, right? I don't think you've ever seen me dictate to other people in my sphere, like, hey, you said something bad about me, you need to take this down. Or, hey, I saw that you said this, I need you to cover for me. I don't know if I've ever messaged somebody on that, ever. Even when people proactively reach out to me and ask me, I always say, hey, listen, cover shit how you want to. But that's funny that Hasan is pretending I do that when that's what Hasan does, but okay.
By his side. And there are logs to prove this point. This is not speculation.
Logs to prove what point? That... Wait, what?
Be a very transactional approach to constantly be by his side. And there are logs There are logs to prove this point. This is not speculation.
Not only are there not logs to prove that point, I could probably produce logs literally to the opposite. The only thing that oh fuck, I wiped my whole Discord prior to January 1st because they're fucking weirdos. But I mean, like, I can see like Turkey Tom's response here. Like, Turkey Tom messaged me on November 30th and he said, hey, because people think that I'll do this. He's like, what's the DGG policy on these leaks? Am I nuked from orbit if I talk about it? And I think my response to him was something along the lines of, hey, I don't care what you talk about or whatever. Just trying to say like the names of the people involved because they want their privacy, if that's at all possible. And then he said, okay, and gave me a thumbs up. And then he made videos about it. Like, I've said this to every single person that's ever contacted me ever. Now, meanwhile, there are literally videos of people like Nick getting text messages from Hasan.
Hasan messaged me.
Nimplal said, some of Hasan's ideas on stream are a little bit insane. And Nick was getting a lot of heat because basically Hasan abandoned him on Hasan's stream and made him watch a Houthi propaganda video.
Oh no, he knows. Uh-oh. What? I think modern healthcare should cover the cost of high-end prostitutes for emotionally starved men. That's my take, Lamau. Do we agree?
When Parker, no, was it Parker or was it Dean? When Dean was going to cover that content nuke, Hasan literally shows up in his stream to give him guidance on things.
It's been funny, okay?
Here he is, like minutes into it.
Apart from debates, it's actually funny because you and the way you do your content, kind of like doing debates with some reactionary content and other related forms of political information and education-esque content, actually came up in a conversation I was having with somebody that's, kind of been helping me. They're like, well, look at Hasan, he's doing it perfect. He does debates and reactionary content. And that seems like a much better way to live your life.
Well, for me, like
You've got Ludwig, who literally had to remove videos because Hasan didn't like the fact that there was a joke. I mean, there are so many examples of this that we can go through. Like, yeah. So it's just funny that it sounds like, I'm not speculating. There are logs of this. There are no logs of this. I've never done this in my life. Oh, and then you've got Hasan's messages to LSF mods asking them to remove certain threats. And then when they don't, he baby rages out and he tells his whole community, we need to go and brigade LSF until I get banned from it so they stop posting about me there. Oh, fuck. I don't know if I'm able to find.
Dude, I can't deal with this. I cannot fucking deal with this, dude. I like, people are so fucking stupid. Like, actually fucking stupid. Hasan seems to think that Twitch's officially licensed emotes is copyright infringement. Dude, okay? First and foremost, apparently the fucking backstory of the Total Biscuit emote literally fucking revolves around, like, a photographer trying to, there's nothing like farm sympathy or anything like that. I should get banned off LSF. I hope I get banned off LSF. LSF, please ban me, okay? It's fucking unbearable. It is unstoppable every single instance. And when I get banned, any criticism of me equals invalid. Bro, what criticism? I'm already fucking pointing out how inconsistent and delusional this shit is, dude. That's not criticism. You are a delusional, pathological psychopath.
I went back and looked. The Kamala fight with Hasan happened in July of 2019, where Hasan had about 3K average viewers and 12K max that month. You had 4K viewers and 18K max viewers that month. He was not eclipsing you, sure. But yeah. Anyway, it's just so cringe that, yeah, he just lies about everything. But whatever. I mean, there's like a million examples. You either know or he's just like propagandizing to his little Twitch audience that he's got like a chokehold on.
There are logs all the way back from like, I think 2018 or 2019, not 2018, sorry, 2019, talking about how frustrated he was that, I had more exposure than he did. I never really...
What? The only thing I could ever think of that might match this, and I still feel the same way, is I might be frustrated that like somebody is just doing open propaganda with no pushback on Twitch that I think is crazy. But that has nothing to do with, I guess when people talk about me, they always take like whatever interpretation possible. Like if I'm walking down the street and some guy like screams at me and I jump, like if the guy's black, people are going to use that as an example that like I'm racist. Or if I see some dude like punch some guy in the face and I'm like, man, that seems kind of violent, and the dude is like Turkish, people are going to say, oh, he's like Islamophobe. Like it's just the dumbest. But okay, whatever. Okay, chief.
Cared about or thought about it like that. I think it's like really fucking sad that this was the primary motivator for him. But I mean, he has voluntarily revealed that he has no interest in any.
It was the primary motivator. Like all of this shit is on the internet. Although obviously his fans will never watch. But like everybody can see the huge debate we had over the Kamala Harris shit when she was just a candidate. Like everybody can go back and watch that and see that as the dividing point. And by the way, I didn't even hate Hasan after that debate. That's when he decided he hated me, which is why he started to ambush me on shows to try to debate pedophile me, but got dumpstered because he was part of the whole N-word arc bullshit, where he tried to jump onto that show with the couple of cringe lords and own me in that debate. But okay.
Anything really other than elevating his own personal status and like winning arguments and shit like that. So
true. Those are also two very different things, but I like how we just pretend they're the same thing. It's very weird sometimes when people are so desperate for like a debate own against me, where they're like, oh yeah, he just likes to be logically correct and win arguments. Like, yeah, I usually do. Yeah. I mean, as opposed to being what, incorrect? Like what? Yeah, what do you want me to say? I don't like to be wrong about things, obviously. I would hope you're the same, but okay.
You and D grew apart. Did you have one?
Gave me 30 minutes of his time. And I think it's safe to say that both of us might have learned a little thing or two from this conversation we had.
Oh, boy.
How pleasant was it? How tense was it? You'll have to watch to see for yourself. I'm not going to give away the details. All I'm going to tell you is that it's worth watching. And keep in mind, it's me leaning on what I always tell y'all. You might think differently than me politically. You might come from a different ethnic background. Your ideology may not be the same as mine. I'm a centrist who leans left. He clearly leans right. I'm not one of those people who believes because you don't think the way that I think that you should be vilified and excoriated and what have you. Just because you think differently than me doesn't mean I'm going to shut you down and I don't want to hear a damn word that you have to say. I'm not built like that. I believe grown-ups get together and talk and hash things out in a respectful and decent manner. He called me a jackass. I don't know whether he's capable of doing what I just described myself as doing and being. But I'm about to
Did you see
find
Harry
out.
Sisson's Twitter response? Nope.
This is a listening session. Asking what I want to ask, but listening to his point of view and his perspective. And showing him the respect any decent human being deserves. That's what I'm going to do with Ben Shapiro up next. I do not believe this is a conversation you want to miss.
Oh, boy.
More of the Stephen A. Smith Show in a minute, right after I pay these bills.
Jesus Christ.
All right, everybody, listen up. With all the big-time sports action that's happening each and every day, the Stephen A. Smith Show wants to make sure you are taking advantage of it all. That's why we've partnered with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching sports. The app is really easy to use. To make a lineup, all you have to do is pick more or less on a few player stats. Choose from any of your favorite players, Luka Doncic, Jimmy Butler, and Zach LaVine, all in the same entry.
Sports
then sit
betting.
back and watch.
Hell
the list
yeah.
is absolutely endless. You can play Prize Picks in over 40 states, including California and Texas. Best of all, Prize Picks will give you $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. Win or lose, you'll get $50. Just use promo code SAS and download Prize Picks right now. Again, download the app and use code SAS to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game.
Damn. Our next president.
My next guest is a conservative media personality and host of the Daily Wire's The Ben Shapiro Show. He recently made headlines by calling for Derek Chauvin, the former police officer who killed George Floyd, to be pardoned. So we're going to get right into that. Please welcome to the show the one and only Mr. Ben Shapiro. Ben, how are you, sir? How's everything?
Thank God, doing well, Stephen. How are you doing?
Okay, I want to ask, and I asked this affectionately. I'm not trying to be incendiary. You called me a jackass. How many dudes do you call a jackass, and then you go on this show? Could you tell me that? Could you answer that one first?
Hey, I appreciate you having me on, and the invitation, as you know, is open the other way around. It's shockingly, the answer is probably a lot, actually, in terms of the number of people who I've called a jackass who I've then actually become friendly with, or who I've had on the show, or vice versa. So you're in this business, you know it.
I got you. I'm not overly offended. Trust me on that. All right. But thank you for coming on the show. So let's get right into it. As you know, I spoke out against your petition to get President Trump to pardon former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. For those that don't know, Chauvin was sentenced to 22 years in prison after being convicted of unintentional second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter of George Floyd. I wondered if you would feel that way if the officer was black and the victim was Jewish. That was what I said.
Damn.
And your response was to call me a race baiter.
Damn.
Why is that, Ben Shapiro?
Well, to me, the entire case against Derek Chauvin was rooted in a sort of public racial essentialism that I thought was unnecessary to analyze the case. If I'm going to look at this case and just look at the facts of the case, the race of the person on the ground and the race of the officer are irrelevant, and we should treat it exactly the same, whether both people were black, both people are white, one person was Jewish, one person was not Jewish. The identity of the person on the ground, I think, should not be the deciding factor in whether or not Derek Chauvin was convicted of second-degree murder. It should be the situation, the facts of the case, the autopsy report, and all of the rest. And so the thing that I actually objected to was the suggestion that my opinion would have changed, rooted in the, say, racial or religious identity of the person who died, as opposed to the racial or religious identity of the person who was the police officer. I just don't think that that's how we ought to decide criminal justice cases in general.
In fairness to you, I can understand that in general. Damn it, in most instances, I can agree with that. But those are cases that we hear about. I'm talking about the visual impact. So let's stay right there, Ben. I am a black man, and I see this black man on the ground, face down, handcuffs behind him. Face is imprinted into the pavement. The knee of the police officer is on the back of his neck. He's literally saying he can't breathe, to one point crying for his mama. And it happens for over 9 minutes. I understand from a technical perspective, from a specific analytical perspective, forensic evidence, et cetera, fentanyl in the system, et cetera. I got all of that. My point is, and my question to you at that time was,
oh God,
seeing that, how could you have another opinion? How could it be based on the preponderance of evidence that you threw into the fray in order to ask for this man to be pardoned? I'm just going by, like, there are certain things that you just see, and 1 + 1 = 2.
So, I mean, Stephen, actually, if you go back to my tweets at the time, May 30th and June 1st, if you look at my tweets, I'm saying the same kind of things you're saying right now. I'm saying the same kind of things at that time that everybody else is saying, seeing the tape, because there's no way to look at the tape and not be sort of shocked by what you're seeing on the tape, obviously. And then I think that the mark of a reasonable person is to change your opinion as the evidence changes. A lot of evidence emerged between the time that the tape was released, that horrible 9-minute tape, and the time the conviction actually happened. I mean, there's a full trial. There were
oh boy. Let me use a restroom real quick before we get into every bullshit conspiracy that he brings up regarding this. One sec. Oh boy.
Autopsy reports. There was witness evidence. There were other people whose testimony was taken. There were multiple medical specialists who were called. And so in looking at all of that, that's the way we're supposed to adjudicate whether or not a person deserves to spend 22 years in prison, not based simply on our immediate gut response to the tape. And again, I had the same gut response to the tape that you did, and I think that everybody did. I think actually that tends to be the gut response of people when we see a lot of police activity, actually. It turns out that the police do a lot of things that look really rough on tape and really difficult on tape, and this was one of those things. And then as we later learned that, for example, the sort of tactic that Chauvin is using there was actually trained by the Minneapolis Police Department, right? Like,
this is a thing that I wish I could, I need to watch the deals of the case because they address claims like this, like whether the police department trained them in this or not. Because he's saying this, but I thought they brought in a training officer to testify that they actually weren't trained that way. But I don't know because I didn't watch the fucking trial, so I can't speak to this part.
It's a submission technique that's used if you have a person who's resisting arrest, or if you learn during the course of the investigation that George Floyd was saying, I can't breathe, before he was even taken out of the car. He says, I can't breathe on the longer tape 6 times before he's even taken out of the car. I mean, it's a very long interaction with the police officers.
He does say that. I'm surprised he doesn't bring up the other one where he's like, and he said, take me out of the car, put me on the ground. He also says that too. And it's like clear that he's like just talking shit because he just doesn't want to be arrested. But that doesn't mean that you can then put him on the ground and sincerely keep him from breathing, right? Like, I think that if Chauvin, there was a guy, how am I getting this parts of this case wrong? There was the guy in the New York subway that choked and killed that one dude. And I thought the totality of that choke was like, I thought it was less than 2 minutes. Am I wrong on that? Did we look it up? Was it actually longer? It was a decently short amount of time, and then the guy died. Like, if that was the case with Chauvin, where if he was like on Floyd for like a minute or two, and then the guy died, then I'd be like, okay, Jesus, that's fucked. But like, bro, 9 minutes? Oh, people are saying 3 to 6 minutes. Maybe it was the guy stopped moving for like a short amount of time. I would have to go back and rewatch it. Maybe it was he had the guy in like a bad choke, like he couldn't get a clean choke, and then the guy was like not moving for 30 seconds, and then he let go, and then the dude was already dead, which I thought was crazy, but I don't know.
Before you get to that 9-minute tape, the part that we all saw, and there's a part of the story that you can't see on the tape, which is the reverse angle. You can't see that there's a big crowd that's shouting at Chauvin. Chauvin was responding.
No, it was clean. If it was clean, then the guy would have been passed out for 5+ minutes if he had a clean hold. Because if you had a clean hold on somebody, they're going to pass out in literally 5 seconds.
To that crowd, one of the preliminaries to getting up off of Floyd that way is to call what's called a code 4, which is where it's an all clear, where you feel that the crowd is not a threat to you.
People are saying the guy was motionless for 5 minutes straight. Okay, maybe then if he was, then I just don't remember correctly. I thought that wasn't the case, but I'd have to go back and check.
In fact, even the EMTs who showed up to provide care for Floyd didn't call a code 4 when they arrived on scene because they thought that the crowd was too threatening. So once you take into account all of the facts, if your opinion doesn't change and the fact pattern is different from what you originally thought it was, then you're not doing your job as a commentator. So I can have the same gut response that you have when I first see that tape. The question is what you do when more of those facts emerge, when you do see more of that evidence emerge, when you do read the testimony and see the autopsies.
See, but I believe, and this is just my belief, because in fairness to you, you're absolutely right. You did put out that tweet initially, and your position was it was shared by the Hannitys of the world, the Mark Levins of the world, and various others, obviously with a lot of people on the left as well, before the preponderance of evidence that you're alluding to came into play. I get that. So in fairness to you, I have to say that. But sometimes I'm going to say this to you because you're a pretty brilliant dude. Nobody can deny it. With what you've accomplished with the Daily Wire, what you've been able to do in your career. I'm just reading something. You were a syndicated columnist at the age of 17, for crying out loud. This is who you are. This is who I'm talking to here. Is it possible that sometimes we could be so brilliant that our intellect gets in the way of common sense? For example, what I mean by that is this, Ben. It was a knee on his neck for 9.5 minutes. If that didn't happen, is he still alive? I'm not talking about today because anything could have happened to you. I'm just saying the fact that Derek Chauvin's knee was on his neck, that to me should speak for itself, because if the man is clamoring for you to get off the back of his neck while you got him handcuffed into the ground, okay, why is it wrong for us to stop there and say that was excessive on the part of the police officer?
And I don't know if Stephen Smith is aware of this exactly, but he stumbled into the, it's like the eggshell argument or something, that when you're in control of a situation and you're dealing with another person's body, like you have to treat them under the assumption that they're like an eggshell or whatever. some relatively minor interaction for some people might not be that threatening, but for other people it could cause them to die. Like you have to treat them as such, and you'll be held accountable as such. That you can't just go up to every person and assume. Like there's an argument to be made that even if he died of a fentanyl overdose, Floyd or Chauvin still would have been responsible because the guy was, or if he had some medical condition, he would have still been responsible because the guy was under Chauvin's custody, basically, right? He was being detained by him. That's not an excuse to thin skull rule. Is it the thin skull rule or is it the eggshell rule? Wait, this might be the thin skull rule, and the eggshell rule has to do with insurance shit or whatever, but it's whatever. The concept is what I'm talking about.
Because you had him contained. He wasn't a threat to you. What's wrong with that thinking?
Okay, so there are a couple of things that could be argued by the defense, and in fact were argued by the defense in this case. One of them, again, was that this was a trained technique by the Minneapolis Police Department to keep somebody in this position so long as you have not called a code 4, which is where you say there's an all clear, and now you can move the person who's on the ground into the ambulance, for example, if you've already called the ambulance, or back into the police vehicle. When it comes to the actual question as to causation of death, right, you have to be the proximate cause of the death. It's not just enough for it to be a contributing factor, because it turns out that increased stress can cause death in a person who has a human heart that is significantly larger than normal.
Oh man, I need my criminal lawyers. No, this applies to civil shit too. Proximate cause, in this circumstance, I don't believe. So proximate cause, I think, is like how much did a person's actions contribute to a thing. I'm pretty sure that when you talk about handling here, proximate cause is not the analysis I think that you partake in. Like if somebody has a pre-existing heart condition and then you go to like arrest them and you kind of like throw them on the ground or whatever, and then they end up dying in your custody, even though they died 99% because of the heart condition, the proximate cause is not the analysis that you use there. The analysis you use is that the thin skull or the eggshell rule or whatever. Like this person was in your control. You have to be aware that some people might have these conditions. Even if you're not the primary contributor, even if you wouldn't say proximately, you were mostly the one that, or you weren't even the proximate cause of this person's death. I don't think that's the analysis that you use in these circumstances. I need my legal people to tell me, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Yeah.
The autopsy showed that Floyd, unfortunately, had an incredibly enlarged heart, much heavier than normal. His lungs were much larger than normal person's lungs because of heavy and over time drug use. He had 11 nanograms of fentanyl in his system.
All of the drug talk screen shit is totally and completely irrelevant. We all have video of George Floyd dying. It was very, very, very obviously and very, very, very clearly not the result of a drug overdose. So anything citing any tox report here is just from people that don't do drugs, don't know how drugs work, or don't know what overdoses look like, especially on downers. It's not a guy screaming, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Nobody ODs on downers like this. There was no fentanyl in his bloodstream. His body had already metabolized fentanyl in his system, so his initial levels were even higher. Like this was not an overdose. No reasonable person thinks it was an overdose.
At the time per milliliter of blood, which is over 3 times what it would cause normally to kill somebody.
Who has no tolerance built to it. But there were people, when we looked, there were people that were brought in with like 50 times, I think, the lethal level. You build a tolerance to opiates incredibly quickly.
The original autopsy report openly said that if George Floyd had been found in his house in the same exact physical condition, they would have called it death by overdose. So, all of these things.
But he wasn't found, he wasn't found, in his house after somebody had put a knee on his neck. Like he wouldn't have overdosed. if he wouldn't have had a knee on his neck, he wouldn't have died, which is what Smith was bringing up. He wouldn't have died if not for, somebody said in chat, it's a but-for analysis. But for the knee on his neck, he wouldn't have died, right?
Things taken into account raises the question of reasonable doubt, right? The standard in our criminal justice system is in fact a reasonable doubt standard. And that raises the question as to why there's not, at the very least, reasonable doubt. So you can say that your sort of first jump at this is...
I'm going to turn to Minneapolis
I hate that I haven't watched because I don't know the particular statute because it was third-degree murder and then some manslaughter things that he got. So I don't know what they had to prove to get this conviction. And now he can say, I don't know what they had to do beyond a reasonable doubt to convict, but...
In more crucial testimony in Derek Chauvin's murder trial, Chauvin's lawyer has claimed that the fired officer did what he was trained to do.
I'm fairly certain Destiny's right, assuming it's an intentional criminal act or tort. Proximate causation is more relevant in unintentional acts caused by recklessness or negligence. Yeah, I believe that's the case. So, like, for instance, if you, I don't want to stumble into a thing, or my own civil thing. Like, if it was the case that your child... No, we'll say friend. If it's the case that your friend doesn't have a driver's license, and then you give your friend your keys and you let him drive knowing that he doesn't have a driver's license, if your friend gets into a car accident, you might have some level of liability for that. But if your friend goes on like a fucking terror attack with your F-150 you're not liable for that. Like, because there's a thing called foreseeability. Like, was it possible that you could have known that your friend was about to go commit a fucking terrorist attack with a truck? Probably not, right? There are specific carve-outs for things that have exceptions to this. Like, I think it's called like the Dram state law. Like, if you send a person out of a establishment that's drunk and they get into an accident afterwards, I think the establishment can be held fully liable. But that's a law that circumvents the ordinary foreseeability, proximate cause analysis. But I didn't watch this whole trial though, so I don't know what is the trial like well recorded, or is it also a garbage tier fucking trial with shitty audio? And
We're going to turn to Minneapolis now. In more crucial testimony in Derek Chauvin's murder trial, Chauvin's lawyer has claimed that the fired officer did what he was trained to do when he pinned his knee on George Floyd's neck. Well, today, the lieutenant who trained Chauvin told a very different story. Here's CBS's Jamie Yukas.
More police officers coming forward and testifying against one of their own in the Derek Chauvin trial.
Sir, is this an MPD trained neck restraint?
No, sir.
Has it ever been?
Not to my neck restraint? No, sir.
Lieutenant Johnny Mersel is a use of force instructor with the Minneapolis Police Department. Chauvin attended his training class in 2018.
But we don't train leg neck restraints with the officers in service. As far as my knowledge, we never have.
Under cross-examination, Mersel testified that officers are trained to use their knee across a person's back or shoulder.
However, we've cautioned officers that be mindful
Trained.
in service. As far as my knowledge, we never have.
Under cross-examination, Mersel testified that officers are trained to use their knee across a
prone arm control.
person's back or shoulder.
However, we've cautioned officers that be mindful of the neck area and to look for the shoulder.
And the jury heard from use of force expert Sergeant Jody Steiger.
My opinion was that the force was excessive.
Steiger is with the Los Angeles Police Department and has worked in some of LA's toughest neighborhoods.
Once he was placed in the prone position on the ground, they should have slowed down or stopped their force as well.
Meanwhile, a key witness and Floyd's friend, Maurice Hall, made an appearance in court today via Zoom. He was sitting in the SUV with Floyd when officers approached their vehicle last May. Hall's lawyer says her client is refusing to testify about whether he provided drugs to Floyd, fearing self-incrimination.
Give this family strength.
Today, George Floyd's family and supporters held a prayer service outside the courthouse.
But one thing I can tell you, after we get the verdict and we get this conviction, we'll be able to breathe.
Jesus.
The prosecution is expected to start calling in.
Fuck me.
Reasonable doubt. So you can say that your sort of first jump at this is he's guilty. Look at the knee on his neck. There's no damage to his neck tissue, by the way, in the autopsy report. You can say all of that.
There doesn't need to be damage to his neck tissue for him to not be able to breathe, though, right?
Say that that's a plausible explanation. I won't even make the case that that's not a plausible explanation. I'll make the case that a plausible explanation is not enough to convict a man in court, especially based on the surrounding circumstances, the amount of pressure that was brought. This was not a fair trial, is one of the points that I'm making. So when it comes to the actual trial itself, there are members of the jury who are at actual rallies wearing shirts that said, "I can't breathe," before they were actually on the jury. There are members of the jury who have openly said that they felt public pressure to convict in a particular way. The president of the United States, or one of the people who was running for president of the United States at the time, Joe Biden, was openly calling for his conviction. The Minneapolis city.
Is that true? Did Biden call for his conviction, or did Biden say that I hope the justice system does what's right or whatever? I'm curious what the actual statements were. I don't know. Wait. Trump was president then, no? Or no, well, the trial might have been ongoing, though. I don't know when he was actually convicted. It might have been under Biden's admin, so.
Paid the family of George Floyd, I believe it was a $27 million payout in the middle of the trial. So all of this tends to go to, is that an impartial jury, right? These $1 million payout, his conviction. The Minneapolis city paid the family of George Floyd, I believe it was a $27 million payout in the middle of the trial.
I don't know how this is normally seen in terms of like poisoning a jury, but a civil case is going to have a different standard of proof, and a civil case is going to be a different thing than the criminal case that's ongoing. So all
of this tends to go to, is that an impartial jury, right? These all have serious consequences for the jury system. And so there's really a few separate questions. One is, was Chauvin responsible for Floyd's death? I think on that question, I would say no. You can say yes. I would say at the very least there's reasonable doubt. And then there's the question of the amount of pressure that was brought on the jury in this particular case to bring a verdict. This was the most highly publicized trial of the modern era by a long shot, because the incident itself had spurred so much public angst and outrage and massive protests involving 20 million people and riots that had cost the taxpayers some $2 billion, or insurance companies some $2 billion. It was the most highly publicized trial probably since the OJ trial. And because of that amount of public pressure, did Chauvin receive a fair trial is obviously a very crucial question here.
But it sounds like your position is that this is more of a political issue as opposed to a policing issue. And what I would say to you as a black man in America, that there are times, and there's a preponderance of evidence throughout the years that shows that policing has been an issue as it pertains to black men, which is one of the things that we constantly bring up. So when that incident happened, I'm thinking about the officer himself, Ben Shapiro, and his intent from the standpoint, you're having your knee on the back of his neck. No matter what, from a medical perspective, we can deduce may have transpired in the end if you didn't have your knee on the back of his neck for that amount of time or exceeding 9 minutes, this would not have been the outcome. And because you were insensitive to that, as a trained police officer who should know better, there should be a level of culpability that comes in your direction. So when somebody looks at you, I look at, and this is where I wanted to go as well, I'm looking at a Ben Shapiro, and this is what I meant when I asked the question about you being, about if George Floyd was a Jewish person. I owe you an explanation for that, so I want to give it to you right now. You are known as a proud Jewish individual, incredibly supportive of the Jewish community, being amongst them, Israel, other things. And I was bringing this up because I said, if that were a Jewish person, the conclusion that you ultimately reached, would you have been patient enough to draw that conclusion, peeling from the information that was deduced on an objective level to reach the conclusion that, hey, you know what? I don't think he should have been put in jail. That's where I was going, because I know how defensive, or I shouldn't say defensive, but a defender of the Jewish community that you are. And that's what I was thinking along those lines.
I mean, but I certainly hope so, because I can name you a dozen Jewish criminals who absolutely deserve to be in jail, right? And Jeffrey Epstein was a Jew.
No, I'm just talking about that kind of
what? Jewish criminals that deserve to be in jail. We're talking about a guy a cop killing a Jewish detainee. I don't feel like it's the same thing, but okay.
Incident in hell, right? I mean, I think that
I'm just talking about that kind of incident.
And my point is that whenever, I'm also a lawyer, right? I mean, my identity as a Jew does not mean I have solidarity with a criminal who happens to be a Jew, or a person who's in a controversial law enforcement confrontation who happens to be a Jew. I mean, my job is to literally remove myself from and I think also that, as those original tweets show, I don't think that you have to have racial solidarity with a person in order to feel empathy for that person's situation. I think that the whole basis of a democratic republic, or us having a conversation right now, is the fact that we can speak to each other across racial and identitarian lines. Right. And so, again, I think that there are an enormous number of people in the country who disagree with me, by the way, who share both my race, and a lot of Jews who, I would say the vast majority of Jews disagree with me on this, or many white Americans who looked at George Floyd and had exactly the same reaction. And as you say, initially, I had the same reaction as you, and that had nothing to do with race. And so the kind of idea that if, let's put it this way, if race is a barrier to logic, then race is the problem, not the solution. Right? Let me ask you this. I mean, if you looked at, you said before that you didn't look at the autopsy report.
They're bringing up the race thing a lot, and I guess my issue is, and again, I didn't follow trial, so fuck me. Like, was this part of the argument that was at trial? Like, public arguments are not the same as the arguments presented to the jury. Now, you can argue, if Ben Shapiro is going to argue that the jury was tainted because of the public arguments, I mean, at that point, I mean, Jesus, what are you going to say? Every single person in the United States, like, can't sit on the jury? I mean, like, do you just not have a trial then? Like, it was covered national attention. Like, what are you even supposed to do at that point? I don't know.
You're not taking a lot of time looking at the evidence or the autopsy. What would it take for you to change your mind on the case, or is there nothing that could change your mind on the case because you saw the tape, for example?
Well, it wouldn't take much, and this is why I said this, because normally...
Like, the annoying thing is, like, this is, at this point, because we're talking about a conviction in criminal court, and I'm not trying to be a boring cuck, but the argument here needs to be heavily informed by a legal analysis, right? Like, I don't know if either of these guys know. I doubt Smith knows. Shapiro might know, and he's lying about it to win the argument. I don't know what the prosecution, I don't know what they needed to prove for the convictions that they got. I actually don't know, because it could be that both these guys actually completely agree with each other at the end of the day, but what they needed to prove what they needed to prove on the prosecution wasn't that Chauvin, beyond a reasonable doubt, wanted to murder wanted to murder George Floyd. It could just be that they needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he did the actions that he did, and that led to his death. And there was a level of like gross negligence or recklessness there, or depravity or whatever related to human life or something. Like that could have just been what they had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Which is why you bring in expert witnesses, like the cop from LA. An expert witness is somebody who can testify to something that they didn't directly observe, but can give their expert testimony on it and can generalize to it. That's why the prosecution maybe brought in people saying, "Does this look excessive?" And they say, "Yeah, any officer should know in this circumstance to prove the depravity or whatever the act or the recklessness of the act." But I didn't watch the trial. I don't know what they were trying to show to the jury. But this kind of like layman's argument publicly is a lot different than the criminal court argument that would have happened. Ben should know this, but whatever.
I would look at the autopsy reports or whatever. You know, I saw people bringing up his arrest.
Somebody said, I don't know if this is true or not, but somebody said, Destiny, the state needed to prove unintentional second-degree murder, which is an offense in the state. All you need to prove for that is the accused committed an unlawful act, for example, assault, and if the victim dies from that, then they are guilty. It's pretty disgusting. Ben is clearly lying to his audience, and he won out in law school. Okay, if that was the case for what they proved, because they said third-degree murder, murder 3, but I think murder 3 ends up looking like first-degree and second-degree murder mean different things in different states, so be careful of that distinction. Like murder 3 and murder 2 sometimes can have huge levels of like they didn't intend to kill a person or whatever. So yeah, be careful of that.
Record. I saw people bringing up fentanyl in the system. I saw all of these things. And all I could come to, Ben, fair or unfair, was that none of that matters if he wasn't on the ground with a knee on the back of his neck for 9+ minutes. Because I'm looking at a trained police officer who should know better. I looked at the experts who were saying, with their trade, there was no reason, and you saw it, I'm sure you saw this, and not to say that you would embrace it with the level of sincerity that others may, because I know the level of skepticism that you look at when you see the news outlets, and by the way, I don't blame you. I'm with you on that, okay? But I would say to you, listening to experts talk about how police officers are trained and pointing to the fact that Derek Chauvin had no business being in that position and putting George Floyd in that position, particularly once he was handcuffed and contained. To me, that, along with the ultimate outcome, is all the evidence I need. And that's where we might differ.
I mean, that's totally fair if we differ on that. I guess the question I would ask you is, given the fact that that was a Minneapolis Police Department trained protocol, given the fact that Floyd did ask to be removed from the car, I mean, in the lead up to
he's doing this one too. He asked to be put on the ground. Like this is not relevant. It doesn't matter.
Situation, the part of the tape that nobody watches, he was actually outside the car. The police officers move him inside the car. He says he's claustrophobic, and then he claims 6 consecutive times that he cannot breathe while he's in the car. So if the idea is that it was the police officer's knee that deprives him of breath, he was already claiming that he couldn't breathe inside the car, suggesting he was already in the middle of some sort of medical event, right?
Like, that's bullshit. Ben doesn't believe he was in the middle of a medical event, and he wasn't if you watch the video. He's just saying shit to not get arrested. I can't breathe. Oh, let me go. Get me out of the car. He's just trying to not get arrested, obviously. I don't think anybody thought he was legitimately in a medical event there. I don't think when you watch the video, it looks like he's in a medical event. He's just trying not to get arrested. But again, even if that is the case, that doesn't absolve you of your responsibility, right? How many episodes of House start with a kid like joking and complaining about something, and then they actually have a medical emergency, okay? And then the parents have to take him to Gregory House to solve his issues, all right?
And then he was brought outside the car. I guess the question that I have for you, again, is what level of evidence would need to be shown for you to get to reasonable doubt? I mean, you seem incredibly certain, right? All I'm saying is that the reasonable doubt standard is what pertains in criminal justice.
Like this here is, I think Ben Shapiro is intentionally being a weaselly little liar. The reasonable doubt standard as applied to what behavior? As applied to what behavior? Because if all they need to prove is that the officer, like the chatter said, if all they needed to prove for this case was that the officer engaged in some illegal activity and he engaged in assault and then somebody that died as a result of that, that's all they need for the conviction, then what do you mean? What is this reasonable doubt standard being applied to? Like, it doesn't apply to every, like, if you're not getting a murder 1 conviction, it doesn't have to be that he, like, beyond reasonable doubt was attempting to murder George Floyd because he hated him or whatever, you know, like, that's not what you have to show. But this is a malicious, it's not a good argument.
Certain, right? All I'm saying is that the reasonable doubt standard is what pertains in criminal justice. What would it take to get you to reasonable doubt? Or is there no reasonable doubt that could be achieved simply by dint of the fact that he had his knee on his neck? By the way, it's not for the full 9 minutes. There are minutes where it's on his back. I mean, even the prosecution acknowledges that. The real question is, I think, the last 50 seconds, right? The last 50 seconds of the tape where Floyd stops breathing and Chauvin's knee is still on his neck. That is really the question as to whether this goes into criminal charge territory.
Okay.
Otherwise, he ends up being in a position where he's actually just using a typical subdual technique before you put the guy back in the car and you take him off to jail.
Yeah, but that's what the expert witnesses were brought in to testify to. Was this a typical way to subdue somebody? And it seems like the expert witnesses brought in argued that no, it wasn't. So you can feel like the department might train on it, but I'm sure if they do, there's probably some caution that they heed if officers employ these techniques, whether or not that's part of the trial process, right?
And I'm saying, to answer your question, there's absolutely nothing that could convince me that Derek Chauvin deserved a different outcome because of what you just articulated, what we saw, even if it's for the last 50 seconds. I'm not changing my position. I understand where you're coming from.
I mean, this is a real question. Do you think? So we've talked about race a little bit. Do you think that Chauvin was a racist? This is a race-based crime.
It's not. I don't know if this is relevant.
Do I believe that?
Is it?
Yes.
Did the prosecution go with this?
Based on anything about his history that they articulated, because I know how people conjure up evidence to go at it. I do believe his actions indicated that, because I didn't see him doing that with anybody else. And the times that we were living in, and the climate, as you articulated accurately, I might add, the heightened level of sensitivity that it exists because of brutality on the part of some police officers. By the way, I never say police brutality because I don't like to castigate all police officers that way. I know if I'm in trouble, I'm calling 911. I'm not going to sit up there and denigrate police officers throughout this country. But there's rogues that exist in every profession. And I think there's rogues that exist with certain police officers. So to me, he came across as one. And that was my problem with it. Having said that, I want to get to...
Is there any credibility to the argument that witnesses or experts that testified were afraid their testimony would get them targeted or attacked? I mean, there can be. And I mean, for some circumstances, you can have like a gag order on certain things where people aren't allowed to communicate with members of the... Well, I don't think you're allowed to talk to the members of the jury while they're deliberating the case at all, or while the case is ongoing. But I mean, like, I'm sure like to some extent that might be a thing that people worry about. But then what? Then what is your alternative? If there's an incredibly popular, like, national level case that everybody's talking about, you just don't go to trial? Like, you're just not allowed to have that trial process because too many people are seeing it and have an opinion on it? Like, what's the alternative there?
To something else, because we're going to stay on this subject of race in this regard. When you saw the climate that exists, I understand you believe it was primarily instigated by the left. I want to know where you draw the line in the sand, and in terms of veering away from the political and just looking at a case on its merit and saying, this is what I see, this is where I stand, completely devoid of politics. I'm not talking race, I'm talking politics, meaning this has nothing to do with politics. This is the climate that we're living in. This officer should have known better, etc. Do you ever find yourself in a position where you're able to dismiss yourself from the political impact of something or the political agenda of something to draw your conclusions?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that in this particular case, this is a good indicator of trying to withdraw from a political sort of calculation, given the fact that, as some people have pointed out, on a pragmatic level, they've suggested that President Trump pardoning Derek Chauvin would be bad for President Trump politically. And the case that I've made is that's his job, determine.
So then, I mean, are we going to say then that like every type of court case like this, we just don't trust the outcome? Like, would Ben Shapiro give the same credence to... I'm sure there was a case where a police officer got off on killing some unarmed black dude or something. I'm sure it's happened. Like, would Ben Shapiro say, oh, well, none of these should be, or like these should all be retried because these juries, you know, had pressure, or there were people this is, I mean, like, you have to have some alternative. Like, yeah, there's going to be cases that are so popular, it's going to be hard to find a jury that doesn't have some kind of opinion on it. But I mean, that's part of the process. Like, and if the case is so nationally popular, I mean, like, it's just, I don't know what his alternative is.
And what's pragmatic for him politically, it's my job to call something out as wrong when I see it to be wrong. In terms of criminal justice cases that have involved race, where I've removed myself on the other side, I mean, there are a bunch of them. Walter Scott, right, is a great example of a black man who was victimized by a white police officer. The police officer ends up convicted and going to jail. You're saying I'm not campaigning on his behalf because he deserved to go to jail, the officer in the Walter Scott case. There have been a number of horrifying or police-involved crimes in which the police officer deserves to lose his job and or go to jail, depending on the activities of the police officer. And you have to analyze those one by one. And I think that what we've seen, particularly from the legacy media over the course of the last many years, is that the only types of stories that tend to break into the news are ones with a...
Would biased jury be ground for an appeal? Yeah, you can appeal because of jury shit. But I think Chauvin has used all his appeals and he didn't win any of them, so...
A black victim and a white police officer, And the media immediately jumped to a particular narrative conclusion on the basis of that. And even if the facts end up debunking that conclusion, that narrative continues to be maintained. I mean, a good example of this might be Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, where the initial claim was that Michael Brown was shot in the back by a police officer in cold blood. And it turned out that every aspect of that story was false. And yet there are still people who will, sort of repeat the hands up, don't shoot lie that never happened. I mean, that literally never happened. And that was debunked by the Eric Holder Department of Justice, for example. Okay. So I think that we really do have to look at each one of these situations in isolation. We're talking about the life of a person. If you're talking about narrative, if you're talking about sort of generalized race in America, then I think that it's important to look at as much data as humanly possible. I'm a data-driven person, and so I'll look at everything from the studies of Roland Fryer over at Harvard University about police.
I think it's a legitimate point that it's very difficult to have a fair trial when it becomes such a media circus. However, the only alternative would mean severe restrictions on the First Amendment, which I doubt Ben would. Yeah, like if you want, because people get mad about Tommy Robinson. Now, I don't know Ben Shapiro's true opinions on him, or Tommy Robbins, or is it Robinson? Robbins? I doubt I can find Ben Shapiro's true opinion on him because that guy is legitimately a fucking neo-Nazi. But in the UK, they have rules where they do have gag orders on ongoing trials so that they don't run into this exact problem. But every conservative that talks about that says that those are violations of freedom of speech. So I mean, like you can't have it all ways. Like you have to give somewhere, you know?
Misconduct toward minorities. And it ranges on the scale, by the way. What Roland Fryer studies tend to show is that, for example, there's no disproportionate killing of black men by the police. There's disproportionate use of lower level uses of forces by police depending on the circumstance based on race. So that's something Roland Fryer has found at Harvard. Right? Like that's the sort of conversation that I think is useful and interesting. But I think that when it gets telescoped into one particular case, and then that case is used as sort of the meta-narrative justifier, that's really negative, and that's really bad for the country. Because what we should be doing, you want to lose trust in the criminal justice system overall, telegraph all race relations into the OJ case, the Michael Brown case, the Derek Chauvin case, the George Floyd case. If you take all of America's race relations and you sort of...
Would you be in favor of that? I don't know. I think there's an argument to be made for it, but I don't feel strongly one way or another. But it's another area where you can have legitimate disagreements on freedom of speech. And it doesn't mean one side is pro-freedom of speech and one side is anti-freedom of speech, like something like Asmagul would say. Like, freedom of speech has a cost. Every right you're afforded, positive or negative, has costs associated with it. There are pros and cons to almost everything you can imagine. And to pretend that it's wholly good to have freedom of speech and there's no drawbacks, or it's wholly good to have the Second Amendment, no drawbacks, is just dishonest. It's stupid.
Put it on the back of one particular fact pattern. Usually the fact pattern is not capable of carrying that narrative burden.
But Ben, isn't that easy for us on the outside looking at data, looking at analytics to draw those conclusions, as opposed to us having a personal experience or a personal investment in it? Like, for example, when it comes to the Jewish community, I would never think for 1 second that I could fully grasp and inhale what you experience as a Jewish person in the United States of America, when we've seen heightened levels of anti-Semitism, for example, and people alluding to those kind of things. Well, I'm not a Jewish person, so I wouldn't know. What about the argument that when we talk about black folks, you can point to data all you want to, and we get that part, but the real experiences that we endure from time to time is not something that you can necessarily calculate. How serious do you take those assertions coming from a community, whether it's your own mind or anybody else's?
Obviously, it's true that we can never fully get into one another's shoes, right? I mean, that's just the reality of the world, and that's true beyond race. That's just true for individuals. You, Stephen, or me as an individual, you can't live in my shoes. I can't live in we're different people. We live different lives. But when it comes to making public policy, then the only sort of gauge that you can have really is the data. Because anecdotal evidence, you can't make public policy for millions of people based on anecdotal evidence, because you can't legislate people's feelings. I mean, this is sort of one of my things. You know, when it comes to trying to craft law, for example, making law based on the personal feelings of people's quote unquote lived experiences is a bad way to make law that is going to have to be generally applicable. Because I may have particular feelings about a particular criminal case based on my own personal experiences. But if we do that, then what you end up with is a really high level of tribalism, in which it's if your racial identity prevails or my racial identity prevails, really bad things can come from that. And the law is designed to treat people as equal individuals underneath it. And so, you know, the relevance of lived experience, that may play a part in us being able to understand one another as individuals if we're having conversation over dinner, or if we're giving advice to each other about our kids. But when it comes to actually making public policy, it's a different thing.
Yeah, you got...
I would the problem with conceptual things like this is I agree with what Ben Shapiro is saying conceptually, but in application, we might end up like disagreeing. Like there are times where you might have a feeling personally about the logicalness of a thing, but you kind of have to take into account the emotional interpretation of things because it can actually impact how things play out. So like a good example might be, I don't know if this has taken effect or if like every state has followed suit, but if I were to tell you there should be a greater penalty in infecting somebody with syphilis, or I'm sorry, with HIV, as opposed to infecting somebody with like gonorrhea or chlamydia or whatever, right? That might like logically on its face pass like a logic test. Like, oh yeah, this makes sense, that there would be a greater penalty for this. But if the effect, because of how people emotionally feel or engage with laws or whatever, like people see that law and they're like, oh my God, like I might, pass HIV onto somebody, now I've committed like a felony or something. This is like a worst thing in the world. So I'm just not going to get tested now for it so that I can never be convicted under this law because I have to knowingly do it. Well, now you've got a case where you have a law that's written and it seems like logical and reasonable. Like, okay, yeah, we should hold people accountable for transmitting more deadly diseases to people. But if the effect of that law is because of people's emotional feelings about their chance of getting convicted or whatever are going to be to not get tested for something, okay, well, fuck, now this is stupid. So in California, they changed the conviction stuff to match, I think, for HIV. They degraded it to like a misdemeanor crime, the same as any other, I think, transmission of a disease. But the reason why is because if you treat it as a felony, people just won't get tested, and then now it's like pointless. You're causing more harm than good. But
and you make a valid point about policy. When you talk about policy, you can't just go by personal experience. It's got to be the numbers. It's got to be the data. I totally get that. By the way, just as an aside before I get to my next question, lung expert testified George Floyd died because his breathing was restricted. So I just wanted to point that out now, because, again, that's with the weight on his neck. We got to remember that. But let me go to this. I mean, the Trump pardon, which you obviously was advocating for, would only affect Chauvin's federal conviction where he pleaded guilty for violating Floyd's civil rights. The pardon would have no bearing on his state sentence for second-degree and third-degree murder.
Which
Even
are
if
also like
Minnesota
21
Governor
years.
Tim Walz pardoned him, he'd remain in prison regardless of Trump's actions. Of all the things to ask President Trump to pardon, then, why this, Ben? Why this?
So I've asked President Trump to do many, many things. This is certainly not the only thing that I'd like President Trump to do, ranging from tariff policy to foreign policy to tax policy. There are many things that I ask President Trump to do on a daily basis on the show. On this one, because I think that it was such a driver of a narrative that I actually do think is false and has been damaging in the United States, which is the idea that there is a tremendous amount of racial tension in America and that's accelerated over the past couple of decades. Yeah.
Like this whole argument that he's making right now is ridiculous. Firstly, I'm pretty sure that pardons carry with them an imputation of imputation. Is that the right word? They carry with them the idea that you're guilty of what you did. Like you're accepting fault. I think that's what legal scholars generally side on. You're basically accepting fault if you accept a pardon first. Number one. Number two, is he implying that if this goes through, this pardon goes through, that it's like going to help race relations in the United States? That's wild.
I think that it's important to elevate individual justice above, again, that sort of group identity-based narrative for the sake of the body politic. The BLM movement of 2020 was, at the very least, incredibly divisive and on a material level, incredibly damaging to the United States. And I think that one of the things that I'd like to get back to in the United States is a time when we actually had pretty good racial feelings about one another, and it wasn't all that long ago. I think that if you go back to the polling data, yes, if you go back
between the black community and the Jewish community, sure, but the black community and white community?
So if you go back to Gallup polls of 2012, literally 2012,
okay.
In 2012, 75% of white Americans thought that race relations were on a good path with black Americans, and 65% of black Americans also thought that race relations were on a good path in the United States. And then by 2014, it had all dumped down into the below 50 mark for both whites and black Americans, and it never recovered from there. And one of the inciting events of that was, in fact, the riots in Ferguson and the sort of elevation of this narrative that America was deeply systemically racist in incurable ways, and that every inequality in American life could be chalked up to inequities that were buried in the founding of the country, and this whole broader racial narrative, which I think, again, that the best...
I wonder how much stuff like Trump insisting that Obama wasn't a U.S. citizen, was actually from Kenya. I wonder how much stuff like that played into this.
To get past a lot of these problems, honestly, it sounds naive, but it isn't. It's just reality. Any group problems, the best way to get past a group problem, if you're an individual, is to talk with another individual and to treat another individual as an individual, as opposed to trying to reduce everything to group identity, which is the reason I think I objected so strongly when you started talking about racial identity with regard to this case, because my whole point was when it comes to interpersonal situations, the best way to treat other human beings, of course, is not as a member of a race. The best way to treat them is as individuals. And of course, a race is a component of their identity, but you treat them as an individual, regardless of what their race is.
Yeah, but my pushback with you would be, Ben, I came at what you said, not at you. You see what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of things that you say and do that I don't disagree with. You know, I'm a centrist, and there's some things, well, damn it, when you make sense, you make sense, okay? We're having this discussion right here. I'm listening to some of your points. I'm like, he's making sense on something. I mean, I get it. I might disagree, but I can't refute where you're coming from. It makes a lot of sense. And what I would ask you before we go, because I know you got to get on out of here, and I can't thank you enough for your time. And again, I'm going to come on your show when you ask me to as well. I really, really appreciate it. I'm not going to run from it. But I got to ask you this. When you talk about just treating individuals as individuals, one could easily argue that Ben Shapiro, with over 7.2 million followers, by the way, on his YouTube show. Okay, let's get that out the way with the Daily Wire and what you've been doing with that for years. Folks are not necessarily treated as individuals. There is groupthink. There are, and I'm not talking about just you. I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about all of us. I'm guilty of this. You're guilty. Everybody, in my estimation. Where we think about something, when you had an issue with how I came at you, you brought up the left. And I'm disagreeing with the left at least 50% of the time, but you associated me with the left. When you've disagreed with others, I've heard you associate them with a group as opposed to treating them as individuals. So that seems to be counter to what you just articulated.
So I think that you're right to point out that I should characterize you as an individual with individual political views. Sure, I could do a better job of that. And when it comes to ideological grouping, I will say there is a difference between ideological grouping and, say, racial grouping. Right? Race is an immutable characteristic of who people are. No matter how many Kenny G tunes you listen to, Stephen, you'll still be a black man, and no matter and no matter what racial stereotype I engage in, I'll still be a nerdy Jewish guy. That's just the way it is. But when it comes to ideological groups are quite real, obviously, and so describing people as a member of an ideological camp, I don't think is targeting a group in the same way as it would be to target blacks as a group, or Jews as a group, or Asians as a group, or any other immutable characteristic.
Hey, Ben, we're running out of time. I know you've got to go. I've got to go. I would love to further this conversation with you into the future. Your show, my show, and it doesn't matter. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm thankful that you came on. My last question, am I still a jackass? I just want to make sure. Am I still a jackass? I just want to know.
No. Now you're the best, Stephen. That's how this works.
I got you. Ben Shapiro, man, I appreciate it, man. I'm looking forward to coming on your show, and I'm looking forward to having you back on so we can further this conversation, because obviously we're both running out of time. Thank you for the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy. What's up, everybody? Stephen A. Smith.
Wow. Is this like his review? I don't know if it's like sports stuff or...
And he came right on this show, and he couldn't have been more pleasant, and he could not have articulated his point of view any better. I don't agree with it. I believe certain things.
Hi. What's up?
I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated.
But how did the
execute
number? I mean, I don't mean to be pedantic here, but how did the number?
Have you ever had somebody's contact that shows their name, and then you have somebody else's number there?
I never make those mistakes.
Right? You got somebody else's number on someone else's contact. So of course I didn't see this loser in the group. It looked like someone else. Now, whether he did it deliberately or it happened in some other technical mean is something we're trying to figure out.
So
I built the group. My job is to make sure.
Oh, that would be super interesting. I don't know how Signal works if you can do that. Are you able to change your name on Signal and then hope you get dragged into a convo because your name is changed? That would be funny if that was possible. But it would be another good reason why you probably shouldn't be doing these types of conversations on Signal. Signal forces you to link a phone number like WhatsApp, so it's hard to fake someone. I mean, you could just change your name. It wouldn't be hard to, like, not everybody's gonna have everybody's phone number memorized. I don't have anybody's fucking phone number memorized, so. Anything else tomorrow? What is today? Tuesday? No, I think we had to move it to Friday because Dan is doing something.